Welcome to this virtual music education conference series addressing music education and looking ahead to our future. Tonight's topic is considering curriculum design for music teacher education in the age of COVID-19. We are excited to engage in dialogue during this session. You will notice that your microphones were muted as you entered. Please mute them now and keep them muted unless you are going to speak. It just helps with background noise. If you wish to ask a question or comment, please post using the chat feature. The icon for chat is located at the bottom of your Zoom window. Similar questions from the chat may be combined by the discussion leaders, or leaders may call on you to share your comment. If you are called upon, please unmute your microphone before speaking. The microphone icon is located at the bottom left corner of your screen as well as on your photo. Our session will unfold as follows. Following this welcome, we'll have about 15 minutes of the discussion leaders introducing and framing our topic. We hope to have about 40 minutes of a moderated group discussion. Then our discussion leaders will offer a summary and some conclusions, and then we'll take a few minutes for a quick wrap up and to look ahead to our next session, which will be next week. This evening's presenters are Gina Greer from the University of Massachusetts Lowell, Patrick Schmidt from the Don Wright School of Music, Western University in Ontario, Canada, and David A. Williams from the University of South Florida. Patrick, I believe you're going to open.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to see you all joining us today as well. I want to start by thanking Michelle and Jen for kind of bringing us together, and Michelle for putting all this together, getting the information out, setting up all this, the structure for us to be together here today. So thank you, Michelle. And thanks for everybody that is here and participating. We have over 100 people here, which is fantastic. So great. Gina, David, and I have been met last week to talk a little bit about what we were going to do here today and how we frame this. We're going to try to do that briefly. There's no PowerPoints. There's nothing kind of didactic. It's just kind of setting up of kind of a general ideas about what are the kind of potential issues that we see together as curricular design is concerned. And we really thought about the ideas around, given this kind of the moment of crisis that we find ourselves in, and given the number of issues that are still kind of undecided, unknown, what are the kinds of discussions that we can have? What are the kinds of issues that we can think through today? And I'm going to start just by kind of giving kind of a broad picture, kind of a macro bit, and then David is going to follow, and then Gina. We all thought about the idea that a central issue perhaps today, and as we move forward into summer, those of you who are doing summer classes and then into the next academic year, is the idea of can we, and in what ways can we think about using this moment of crisis to perhaps really bring in some programmatic and curricular design changes that a number of us have been talking about for quite a long time, perhaps over a decade. And I think that regardless of the challenges that we all find ourselves in, and they're numerous, and they will continue certainly into the end of this year, one of the things that we've really wanted to consider and start this conversation is, given where we are, can we stop and rethink what is worth doing for us in terms of our own programs and in terms of the curricular elements that we want to develop? What are the kinds of things and opportunities that we may see that connect to rethinking the practices that we take on? We know that are going to be contingencies that are going to require us to do certain things differently. But what are the potential silver linings that are behind that structure as well? I want to think a little bit about the notion of what change might look like today. I thought that I would start by thinking a little bit about the notion that it seems to me that we have a sense of resilience that's going to be necessary for perhaps the up and down that we see and how we're going to have to deal with classes, curriculum in general, programmatic requirements. We're going to have to think about a sense of reimagining what we do overall. And in there, we might also find some space, perhaps not immediately, perhaps not by September, but for some reform as well. I think that part of this initial group came together out of the work that Jan and Michelle put together in a book about change in 21st century practices. And I think that we might be in a situation, in an environment where we may end up having actually quite positive discussions that emerge out of the crisis that we're thinking about today. I'm going to place I just sent a link to an editorial for the symposium, the CMS Symposium, that just came out, which I thought it was quite interesting. So written from the standpoint of a musicologist, but looking at the field, the music field in general. And I think that's the possibilities there for kind of ecological change and who we are and how we deal with the work that we're doing today is very pressing, and it's quite potentially important for us. We might find ourselves historically looking back at this moment and thinking about in what ways curriculum and program got redesigned because of the situation that we're in. I think that's quite positive. I think that with that also, there's a sense of, what are the kinds of new basics that we might want to engage in and develop? I sent you another document here that looks at, and it comes out of the work of People for Education, which is a not-for-profit here in Canada that looks at a lot of data and educational data. And they kind of are collecting this together and thinking about, what is it that curricula in general across the globe is actually talking about today? So what's trying to put forward as necessary for curricular and programmatic redesign today? And, unsurprising, there are things like thinking creatively and critically, but there is a sense of communication and how do we interact with each other, collaboration, kind of the idea of learning to learn, as well as developing a sense of self in society. And I think that that's an important aspect that might be really critical for us as we think about the redesign and re-engagement with curriculum today. And then finally, I think that there are, important elements and discussions to be had that are going to take place in terms of our relationship with schools. Right, Ed Week just came out with the link that I now just sent, talking about the potential challenges that we're going to see in education, from kind of budgetary kind of reorganization, the kind of syndrome, for instance, that we saw in the kind of post-Katrina New Orleans, with the kind of takeover of charter schools there. I think that what happens after a crisis the size of which we are experiencing today in the educational system, and what is the role of the music educator within that, as a contributing role, hopefully, in terms of curricular kind of renewal, redesign, re-engagement, faced with the challenges that we see in relationship to the changes that we are going to see in terms of labor conditions, in terms of realities of access, issues of equity that are going to be and are already being amplified by what we see, right? So I think that these kind of three elements leads us then, to close to two kinds of different ways that I am thinking that are necessary for us to kind of, on a larger architecture, how do we think about program and curriculum redesign? One is the kind of stuff that is reactive. And I think that a lot of us have been with endless meetings thinking about how do we get to September? How do we get to ensembles to function? What are the issues with timetable and schedules? What are the kind of modular designs that might be in place? What are the number of hours that students will be in contact and how that manages? The issues of grading, pass, fail, infrastructure for minimum development, migration of kind of at the center of delivery, not just with this kind of stand and deliver, but a kind of a multiple center. But I think that there's also a lot of opportunity to think about what are the kind of proactive aspects that we can start developing little by little. Addressing, of course, what is urgent and needed for kind of the minimal delivery, but how do we get to things that I think they're really at the center of my conversation with Gina and David thinking in preparation, which is what and in what ways can we perhaps provide structures for what might be seen as kind of interest-driven pedagogy, which is kind of the center of the idea that for Gina, and in what ways we see not just our own programmatic environments, but the needs of our students as guiding and leading this process. And in what way in these kinds of proactive environments can we think about the encounters that we might have? I think that with this kind of dislocation of the classroom, we might find ways in which we might be collaborating more significantly, more intensively across institution. We might be looking for partnering that goes beyond the partnering that we have with school, but that might link us now with community centers, with other organizations, with musical institutions themselves who will be looking for other partners. And I think that might lead to a different kind of sense of the opportunity for how do we think of ourselves having at the center the idea of collaboration. So I'll stop right there and bring David in.
Wow, Patrick, thank you so much. I guess I want to jump off of a couple of things that you said. I like the idea of new basics, re-examining what it is that is the basics of what a music education is and can be. And then that, in my mind, leads to what curriculum do we look at? I think you said that, Patrick. And so for me, that takes, and this really has very little to do with the pandemic and the situation that we find ourselves in. For me, I think this is just a system-wide issue within our profession, but certainly it's potential to be brought to the forefront even more so now. And that's what goes by lots of different terms, but I use the term learner-centered pedagogy. And whenever I talk to this concept, I'm always trying to remind myself that it's not a thing. There isn't teacher-centered and then there's learner-centered. In my mind, it's a continuum. It isn't black and white. It's a lot of grayscale. And on one end is maybe a 100% or pure learner-centered, which I don't know if that exists. And over here is this pure teacher-centered approach to pedagogy. And I'm not sure that exists either, even though maybe we come close to that sometimes. So in my mind, what I'd like to see various aspects of our profession do is kind of move that over here and live in this area of the grayscale more. So when I talk about learner-centered pedagogy, I mean, at the basics, I think what we're talking about is student autonomy and allowing students to have choice. And primarily, I think that falls into choice of musical style and musics that they wish to study, and then the instruments that would fit into that musical style. And so I never am thinking that I'm teaching popular music, even though oftentimes that's what students choose. They choose to learn some sort of popular music, things that interest them. So I think that's the basis, but there's a series of other characteristics that I think a learner-centered approach in music would look like. And the first one I think that's most important is that the focus, I believe, tends to be on creativity. So that's students songwriting, covering other people's music, composing, arranging, improvising, as opposed to the traditional performance focus of a teacher-centered approach. And so students tend to, in a learner-centered approach, do this creativity in small groups, sometimes alone. And during that time in that small group, when they're making music, they're constantly collaborating. So they talk about music making, and in there, they're making their own creative decisions and musical decisions of what they wish to do. Again, as opposed to the teacher-centered, where the teacher is doing all those things. A few more characteristics. A lot of learner-centered approach in music tends to be oral-based, as learning by ear, as opposed to written. I don't think that's necessary, but it seems to work that way. Almost every experience I've had with my students and personally making music in this way tend to be oral-based. So we're dealing again with students creating their own music and music that they're interested in making. A couple other characteristics: the process tends to be very messy. In our teacher-centered approach over here, we like a very clean, orderly, efficient process, and that doesn't seem to happen too much in a learner-centered classroom. It's a very messy process. There tends not necessarily to be an order, and we're never really sure what's going to come out the end. The end product isn't usually known until way down the road in the process. I think important aspects that should be included in a learner-centered approach are both self and peer assessment. That should, in addition to teacher assessment, there should be a lot of opportunities for students to assess themselves personally and to assess their peers. And then maybe the last piece of this learner-centered puzzle for me is the role of the teacher. I mean, we know what the role is in the teacher-centered process. Basically, the teacher makes all the decisions, or at least a good chunk of them. But in the learner-centered, I think it's a very different role for the teacher. The teacher probably is there to create some wide-spanning, open-ended assignments that then students work on with the aid of the teacher when the students need that. So in a nutshell, that's me. So Gina, I'll turn it over to you.
So thank you, everybody. So a lot of what I've been thinking about since we're in this online environment are issues that I've been thinking about for years with regard to the role of technology and music education. And I guess this has proven to me that if you live long enough, you get to see everything. So that for years, I have been teaching a music tech class that was project-based, and it was very exploratory with creativity at the center, but it was very technology-focused, and all my students thinking they're going to be band directors. What do I need this shit for? I am now, all these same people are emailing me like, thank you, because now that I'm teaching, I was able to make the transition to this online environment, and I'm sort of like the leader in my schools. So it gets me to thinking, there's a lot that needs to change curriculum-wise anyway. This online environment sort of brought a lot of issues to focus for me. And two of the big issues that I don't think a lot of people are addressing at the college level is the social emotional aspect of the learning of our students, which they need now more than ever. And I'm seeing it in college students. I'm seeing it in my string project students. This is huge. And it's that relational pedagogy that we need to really start focusing on more, whether we're still online in the fall or when we go back to traditional teaching, whatever that looks like. You know, and it brings to mind years ago, you know, something that Seymour Papert discussed a lot. You know, so what I've been seeing with a lot of my teachers, their quick conversion to online instruction has merely been the dissemination of content, just putting stuff online, sharing their PowerPoints, creating how-to videos with little thought about rethinking or tweaking their pedagogy or keeping any of that personal connection with their students front and center. And Papert termed the type of technology focused on the importance of delivering content as instructionism, where the emphasis is on the computer as instructor. And I think we have to remove the computer as instructor. It's just a tool. And, you know, and that was in stark contrast to his constructionism, where the emphasis is placed on the student's own construction of knowledge. The idea of having children appropriate knowledge that is personally meaningful as opposed to just learning facts. So in our rush to convert our teaching from the classroom to an online environment, for many teachers, the only thought was, how do we get them to the finish line? How are we going to cover all that needs to be covered between now and the end of the semester? And for many faculty, rather than keeping their class schedules as they were when they were meeting face-to-face, they've been running their classes asynchronously with minimal student interaction. And for what I've discovered with my students is that the social connection with their classmates, and yes, sometimes even their professors, which is a large part of the on-campus undergraduate experience, is completely missing in this format for a lot of our students. And one of my students wrote in her week 8 journal when we switched to online, class was a success last Wednesday. I was happy to see everyone, and I was impressed that class was able to run so smoothly. We were able to do everything that we would usually do, but socially distanced. For her, that was really important, being able to see her friends. And I even found that with, I was really insistent about keeping our string project going, where a lot of our large ensemble directors just said, yeah, nope, we're not going to do it. When I learned that our public schools weren't doing anything online, that they were just sending out learning packets to the students, I just really felt, knowing I have a couple of teaching artists in my string project who grew up in the string project. So I knew that this was a safe space for them, that every week they would come twice a week, they would have friends, they would get to explore music, and there was just an emotional connection that they had, that it was really important for me to keep this going. And we had to try to figure out how to do this. And it wasn't easy, you know, trying to get 30 or 40 out of tune violins and violas and cello playing at the same time in Zoom, not a great idea. So we had to rethink our pedagogy. Zoom was great. We were able to have breakout rooms and we were able to get into smaller groups, and we rethought how we learned the music. And we would do round robins and we would do call and response. And so it wasn't the traditional approach that they would normally take. But the one thing that was evident to everybody at the end of this, we had our last meeting last week, was that in this environment, they actually spent more time getting to know the interests of their students and getting to connect with them on a more personal level. And I have to tell you, when I logged into the string project the first week we did this, and I saw 35 students all come in really excited as they would be logging on just to see their friends. They hadn't seen them in a couple of weeks. This is huge. And as teachers, we need to think about that. And the other thing, as music teacher educators, I have been finding it really, really helpful to collaborate with my teachers in the community. I brought them into my classroom. I brought in my alums, and we figured out real world projects for my students to be able to do to help the teachers out in creating online content for them. So there's a lot that we can do, that we can take out into the world of traditional teaching when we're there again, but it has to be the focus on project-based learning with creativity at the center, a participatory music making involvement. We have to be making music at all times. And we have to rethink sometimes how we make music. You know, it may not be possible if we're online again to keep our traditional concert band going in the same format, but there are other things we can do. And there are, you know, and there are activities that we can create to keep the students engaged and learning music. I think the focus should be on making the experience for our students something that will continue to instill the joy of music making in them. I mean, you know, the one thing that I've noticed everywhere in every facet of the world right now, music is the one thing that is bringing joy to people. And, you know, it is our soul, and we have to figure out how to keep that going. And we have the ability to do that in our next generation of teachers that we're going to be educating. And I think technology might be playing a bigger role than any of us want. But if we learn how to use the tools in the way they were meant to be used, explore these tools, and figure out creative ways of doing it, I think we will have richer curriculum in the future. And so let's open it up to some questions and discussions.
Well, I'll begin. Something that has happened for us, which absolutely surprised me, UCLA has a program to have small groups of about 20 undergraduates across majors meet with senior professors in a small class, and they had a call to do something related to coronavirus literally a week before our last quarter started. So I said, hell, I'll do something on coronavirus and music, just doing a quick search on the songs that have come up. And we spent about 3 weeks, they meet once a week, looking at the parody songs and starting to learn how to use Soundtrap so that they could create something of their own. And lo and behold, about the 4th week, they all told me they're tired of listening to the parody songs. They wanted to deal with the issues they're facing, the fear, the loss, the caring for one another, how to care for one another. And so we started to get lyrics created by our students, the most poignant of which was last week. An Asian student wrote an amazing poem on the prejudice she's been experiencing about being Asian, and that she may have brought the coronavirus here and that kind of thing, even though she's American, you know. And this led to just an incredible discussion among students. And they all discussed with her how they might express the words in music. I just stood by and listened. And they're collaborating in Soundtrap. And this Thursday, I'm looking forward to their products. So I was very hesitant to teach a class of students that I don't know, because from the time my students are freshmen, I know them. So I feel no fear about working online class with them. But boy, to find out the way that this music thing could bring students who did not know each other together, and some of the things, one of the young women is in Turkey right now. She'd returned home. She doesn't know if she can get back to the country for her senior year. Another one is in China. So we have them scattered all over the world. And yet, at 11 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time every Thursday, they all show up no matter what time. This is important to them. They are socially bonding in Zoom and through the process of collaboratively creating music together. So I think we have a real opportunity here. It's a real learning experience for me, and I think for all of us.
I see that Donald DeVito raised his hand. Don, you have a question? You want to make a comment?
Just a comment. Our previous Frank had mentioned Soundtrap, so I just thought I'd take a moment. I'm at a 99% minority Title I school, Rawlings Elementary. We're a center for fine arts, and we're one of the 300 lowest performing schools in Florida, and we've had some real issues with equity in our district to the point that we actually have implementing an equity plan. And I'll go real quick, but I just wanted to tie in what Patrick was saying about learner-led activities and our experiences with Dr. Greer. What we do has been making a real effort to take what the students use in the community and at home. Everything from patty cake games, double Dutch jump roping, hip-hop rhythms, tapping on tables, anything that they do outside of school, we bring in and arrange in the classroom. And then with drum kits, Orff instruments, xylophones, and then we share it. We have a Skype program, so we share it internationally on Skype. We have a lot of contacts nationally and internationally. My students had the benefit of Skyping with Dr. Greer's class, and what we did was using Soundtrap. I learned how to use it. My students learned how to use it in the process. We would take rhythms and riffs that the students would use in the community at home, like the ones I described, and then we would download it into Soundtrap. And then during Skype sessions with Dr. Greer's students, they would improvise off of what our students did. And that has really helped us in this COVID situation because our students in the neighborhood that they're in, we actually have to put Wi-Fi on school buses and drive them out to parks in their community so they can go out in cars to get Wi-Fi to be able to do anything online. And for my students, being able to have the center of what we're doing in lessons be based around what they actually do in their community that's culturally responsive to them has been wonderful. And now with the knowledge of Soundtrap, that's something that they can utilize at home. We've handed out like 80 laptops to our students. So now they're finally at a point where they can start doing these kinds of things at home. So I just wanted to maybe tie those two things together in relation to our discussion. So thanks.
Thanks, Don. Barb Friedman, we want to bring up your point. I think it's a really, really good. And Don teaches what? You teach K through 8?
I teach K to 5.
K to 5, right. So Barb, please bring up your point because I think it's an excellent point. And I think it's not just the students who were thrust into this unwittingly. We all were, but we'd love to hear your point.
Hi, I'm Barbara Friedman. I teach high school in Greenwich, Connecticut. I teach electronic music and audio engineering. So one of the things I've noticed is, my students were using a learning management system. We use Schoology. I use it extensively, and they were ready to use Schoology as a learning tool. I happen to specialize in teaching content and delivering content in learning management systems using multimedia in the learning management. So it's pretty clear. They follow the video, they do that. Of course, when I'm in the classroom, I could go around and as we all know, a student does something and you just see what they're doing, go and correct it. It's not that way in a learning environment. Online learning environment comes back, it goes back, there's all this. I think the issue really is that, students didn't opt into this, and neither did teachers. And I finished a PhD in learning technologies, so I'm, really well trained in and experienced in teaching and learning online and using digital learning environments. But many of our teachers aren't. And what does it take to transfer, and I'm talking a K through 12, or for anybody actually, what does it take to transfer an online experience, an in-person experience into an online experience? And people don't realize you literally have to cut it in half and give it in pieces. And then our students don't know what to do. So aside from hardware issues and software issues and connectivity issues and internet issues and how do we make things even for all students, they're just completely and suddenly thrust into this without having any onboarding experience. I know the state of Pennsylvania has a lot of online learning, and students are gradually, if they opt into it, their parents know, and their parents know they have to help them, and they know that they have to go through a whole process of being onboarded into the whole system and understanding the technology. And so here we are. And I don't know really if that's going to change come September, when I truly think we're still going to be online, a lot of us, unfortunately. So that's kind of my point. Thank you for the time. Oh, somebody asked, do you mind? It says, can you talk more about expectation of content in an online environment? Professors, do you mind?
No, it's Betty Ann actually, Barbara, I asked that question because, and you know, of having a blended model plan for this fall for our students, and we have our music history profs. We need to talk to them about content and expectations.
What grade level are you talking about?
This would be university classes.
Well, look, you know, university is a different animal. It depends on the level. I mean, I teach master's and PhD students, so it's remarkable to me how many university students are very, very similar to my freshmen in high school. But it's just, I see people nodding their head. Yeah. Expectations of content for any student, I think, you know, I keep going back to just chunking everything. And it has to be chunked down to the lowest level learner that you have at your level. And that's why we're experts at teaching, right? We can kind of know what the lowest level learner. Unfortunately, we kind of teach to the 80% curve, don't we, right? And then we do what we have to do with the 10% on each end of the curve. So I don't know that it changes in online learning, except that I think that everything has to be explained so much more in so many different ways, which is why multimedia becomes so important in an online environment. You know, I might be able to go over to a student and show them something on the piano keyboard. Now what I have to do at home is I have to actually video that as if I know what that student might need, or this other student. You have to expect in advance. And I know anybody who's taught online knows that the first time you teach online, the second time is okay, it gets better. By the third time, you kind of get a good flow of correcting your curriculum. So unfortunately, we're all throwing ourselves at this all at once.
Thank you.
I want to briefly comment on some of these things, but I think the discussion is great, and it's so many issues are really prevalent and challenging for us to do. But it seems to be that one of the things that we're going to have to think seriously, either because of the shift into fully online or a blended structure, or simply because of the possibility that we might be, you know, coming in and finding a sense of normalcy, just to be disrupted again, is the possibility that the kind of arch that we have traditionally thought in terms of, you know, 13 weeks, 15 weeks, it's not going to likely be there, which means also that the kind of sense of delivery that we have expected will likely not to be there as well. And I think that generates some interest, and I wonder how people are thinking about these issues right now. In what I'm reminded of some of the work that Don Lebler is out of Griffith University in New York and Australia, and Don's been looking at kind of collaborative assessments, and his work is on assessment. But the crux of the work that he has been doing, for instance, in one of the programs at Griffith, which was a 3-year program on popular music, was that no student did independent work, so were independently graded throughout their 3 years, which meant that every single engagement was based on collaboration, which really kind of shifted a bit of the sense of delivery in some ways, because of the engagement that was always kind of group oriented. It was always about a particular issue that was then developed as part of project, so project based, and it was also collectively assessed, so that there wasn't this kind of constant tension between delivery and assessment of delivery, you know, in a single point, meaning our own entry point. And I think that we are, because of the vicissitudes of the crisis, in a position to actually to do a lot of experimentation that breaks this idea of what it is that we're going to deliver, what it is, this relationship that we tend to have in terms of content, and really kind of rethink what it is that is worth doing within, you know, a 6-week chunk or a 4-week chunk, and that's going to be meaningful, that's going to be professionally developing for students in our teacher education program, but at the same time that places the kind of learning and the kind of initiative for learning, you know, kind of slightly differently, right? Because I think that the delivery model can function very, very easily in online, particularly in poorly designed online environments. So it seems to me that we are in the moment about rethinking what it is that we want to see taking place in any of the classes that we teach, in any kind of the programs that we run. And I wonder how people are thinking about how they might approach that come September.
Well, and that's a great point, Patrick, because, you know, we were all given like, what, a week to get our stuff together online, and okay, now you have to teach your kids. Well, we now have a couple of months ahead of us. And I think, you know, I've been reading some of the comments, and Kelly Parks brings up a great point in that, you know, there is really quality online teaching that can happen, but it takes a great deal of planning. It's a lot of work, a lot of preparation, and there's a lot of rethinking of how you put all the parts of your curriculum together. And Kelly, would you like to speak to this a little bit more, perhaps? Yes, no, maybe?
Well, unless Kelly jumps in.
Actually, Gina, I actually had a little bit of a response to that, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So I moved the second half of my music theory, second semester music theory class online using a free Note Flight online group, and I found there were a lot of students who there were some students who seemed to actually thrive a little better in that environment, and I was really excited about that. But as I got towards the end of the semester, I realized all the ways that I wasn't really sure whether I was necessarily evaluating individual students' performance versus their collaborative work. And so it raised a lot of questions for me in terms of assessment. I mean, collaboration is great, but at the moment when you need to assess, when you need to be able to certify, does this student understand what the standards for the course? It presented a lot of problems for me, especially towards the end of the semester, and especially in the last 2 or 3 days when I was actually pulling together grades for my class. And so I'm kind of in between the feeling that yes, collaboration is good and students can learn from each other and all of those things, but in the end analysis, how do I assess individual students' ability to understand and the standards that the course demands?
Damon, I'll jump in there a little bit. I think it's a great question and a real important question. And I think there's several ways to go about it. One is something I mentioned, that the idea of peer review and self-review. to allow students the opportunity to talk about what they've done and to explain to you why it's good and what the value of that is. I think you gain some insight into their learning, what they learned, maybe what they haven't learned, and the same thing with peers. When peers review the work of that particular group and or individuals, then you get a sense for what they, I'm not too worried about what they say about the review. I'm worried about how they say what they do, which gives me indications that if they have learned. So I don't know if that helps you or not.
Well, yeah, those are definitely very valuable processes, and it may be that I just found myself without time to let those things develop in the 6 or 8 weeks or whatever that we were faced with in online. So those are things that I can try to incorporate earlier on in the process. Ultimately, there's a stage where I have to evaluate whether students know what they're supposed to know.
Right. And Damon, one of the things that I used to do a lot when I co-taught a course with my computer science colleague, and we did a lot of group projects, was we would do an assessment at the end of each project where they had to reflect on what they contributed to the project, what their partners contributed to the project, and give a percentage. So there was always a reflective piece built in where they talked about the process and of their thinking, and they also had to comment and assess the collaboration, what worked, what didn't work.
Yeah. I mean, when in an online environment where you can't defeat collaboration, it's sort of if you can't beat them, join them. Just go incorporate it into the process and then ask students how it's working. Yeah.
Patrick, if I can throw a question your way, when we think ahead to really working on curriculum, how do we find a good balance between putting out the fires of immediacy and dealing with the bigger picture of what else can we be doing in music education? We've been dominated by sort of one particular view of music education. There's so much more that we could offer, but how do we balance urgent and important?
Yeah, I'll be running for president if I have the answer to that one right now, right? But I think that it's kind of a sense of what it is that must be done, right? What it is that is imperative, but what are the kinds of things that might not derail what is imperative and yet place us in a different trajectory, right? Or a slightly different trajectory. I think that combination, or how do we manage that tension, are the kinds of things that can be done. I think that one of the things that has been interesting for us here at Western is actually see the kinds of conversations that simply would not have happened otherwise, right? So faculty, not just in music education, but in performance and colleagues and theory and musicology, thinking about actually the possibilities of how do I engage differently in my studio environment? How do I actually rethink the idea of my ensemble meeting as a kind of a chamber kind of group, right? And I think that there's somebody that wrote a comment here on student interest, and how do we bring students' attention to the kinds of things that are not the kind of normative ensemble structure. That's what the comment says. And therefore, how can we help students not be dismissive of some of these other actions? I think that today we are in a position in which the reality outside us is doing that work for us. Right, that the reality of schools today is one that has never been in our kind of lived histories here. the realities of what higher education is going to be encountering come September is going to be something that we have not experienced in any time, any of us, in any kind of meaningful way. And so I think that the environment is creating the structure for us to bring actually different kind of positions and different kind of potential outcomes, where we don't have to do the hard work of convincing that this ought to be done, that this is beneficial, that this is important. Because those realities, those material realities, economic in some way, but also the realities of how do we actually reach students and how we connect with them, have already done the work for us. And so I think that we are actually in a quite an important position to say, I'm going to try this out. And the kind of normal kind of reluctance and resistance might not be there, because we have now an environment where everybody is trying and experimenting to a certain degree. And so the sense, I think, that of liberty is almost equal to the sense of a little sense of dread to how do we get to this thing to work, right? How do we do monumental shifts and don't feel like I think many of us have felt when we had 3-4 days a week to get our courses online. You know, that we were a little bit, you know, a bit of imposters into that process. So I am actually quite optimistic about the faculty of the schools of music and the realities of what that might take place. I think that there's lots of interesting conversations with ensemble directors going on. There's a lot of interesting conversations going on with theorists about what that might mean, what kind of music might I bring, what kind of engagements might I have that will end the reality of a different shift, where I'm not in the traditional classroom. I might have to actually kind of rethink some of the practices that I have been doing exactly as I have been taught, and so forth and so on. So I think that we are in a moment that is really significant. How do we manage that? My guess is that we manage in kind of, if I were to do kind of some percentage work over here, that we do maybe 30% of what is absolutely necessary, 70% of what's absolutely necessary, but find some way, find some pathway in syllabus development and kind of time frame, in kind of reorganizing content, in collaboration seeking, that creates that kind of track that where I can be experimental and I can bring students to think about that experiment as, you know, as an ethical responsibility also for themselves as they see this profession moving forward. Because, I mean, just the simple reality that many districts and across US and in Canada as well will face decisions, budgetary decisions, about whether or not to continue with their music programs should be incentive enough for us to really see, well, how do we respond to that? How do we preserve certain things, but how do we create a space in which that economic reality alone can be addressed really, you know, directly, and at the same time provide, you know, curricular and learning benefits as well. I think there's a way there. Obviously, you know, as always, you know, the devil's in the details. But I think that a managing of what I need to do to get to a point of delivery in September versus what it is that I'm going to try to do that is challenging myself to do differently, to create a new basics for what I did, for what I do, while keeping in mind issues as, for instance, Gina addressed, the social emotional learning, issues of equity, as several people commented on, issues of collaborative kind of engagements. I think that there's a really potentially interesting place for us all to live. And of course, if we take collaboratively 113 of us to do just that, to change 20% of what I'm doing traditionally with my coursework, we might actually be in a quite remarkable position, because the pushback of the resistance from students, from colleagues, from institutions will be different this time around come September.
If I could jump piggyback onto that, Patrick. I noticed earlier in the chat, Jody Stark, Jody, I don't know you, said something about the practicality of what you were just talking about, that the potential for cuts, especially in the K through 12 sector, because what Jody suggested that we've taught the public and our administration what music making in the schools looks like. And if we can't do that and we don't have any alternative to offer, then the potential seems even greater, as Patrick suggested, for losing teaching positions in K through 12, which of course that's a bad thing. And so I think we're right at the cusp of real possibilities here of trying to change some, as Patrick said, maybe 20%, 30% of what we do, so that we might still survive as we move forward. So thanks, Patrick.
David, hi, I'm Jody. I hope you don't mind me jumping in. I guess the thing that I would like this group to consider is I'm feeling like this is incredibly urgent. Like, this is not a discussion we have today and then we come back together in a month. We have to, as music teacher educators and music educators, be ahead of the politics and the fact that cuts are likely to come. We have to do this now before staffing decisions are made. That's my 2 bits. Thank you.
And of course, the big question is how.
Well, again, you know, we have to think of different models of what music education would look like in the K through 12 schools, you know, especially in this kind of environment. And we have to, you know, make it clear that that music isn't an option. You know, it just like math isn't an option, just like English isn't an option, music is really part of the lifeblood of what makes us human. And we have to figure out a way to do it where they get the music education and they don't feel that, well, we can't have our big ensemble, so who needs the music teacher now? You know, that should not be an option. Yeah, I know, Barb, I'm preaching to the choir. Yeah, I get that. But we definitely have to figure out how to rejigger the model of what people think of when they think of music education. I mean, one of the things that was really interesting that happened quite by accident, and it kind of took everybody a little bit by surprise, and Rachel knows because she saw the video. I had a bunch of students in this progressive pedagogy class who were going to go into the senior center in my town, the Lowell Senior Center, and do a rock and roll lunch. They were going to do live band karaoke. So they were going to play, they were going to rotate on all the different instruments, and they went to the senior center, they got a list of the songs that they wanted to hear, and they prepared all this music that they were going to perform like 2 weeks ago at the senior center. And then all this happened. They couldn't do it. And I just said to them, well, you know, we've got all this technology. How could we deliver the music to them in another format? And they put together this really, really cool video. And this whole project, it was a service learning project, and the whole project, and it was a community project, actually won one of the student research awards. And it went all the way to the provost. And he went to one of these events earlier in the year and was singing along and everything. So it's like he realizes that, okay, it isn't always the concert band. There's still ways of bringing music into the lives of, you know, people and the community. So we have to rethink how we deliver it and what is important. what is important about music and what is important about music making. And we all know, you know, every one of my students, whether they're going to be a music teacher, they're going to music business, they want to be a composer, or they want to be a sound recording person, they all got into this because they loved playing music. So how do we make the playing music valid in this new environment? And that is a challenge. You know, I don't know all the answers, but I think there are lots of ways to do it. I don't know if any of you saw, you know, got a chance to see some of the professional things that are done with great post-production, like the Met Gala, but you know, you have like a conductor air conducting and sending out his video to his performers. Well, the one thing that I was realizing is that you really, when you're sending that, your performance back to them, you really have to nail your part. You know, and so there are some really good ear training skills that we can be developing that way.
I also think that it's important that we think about students making their own music and making their own music together. Professional musicians are scattered around the globe recording their one line and forwarding the track to the next person who adds their one line. So when we have professors trying to put together the 80-piece concert band, it's a huge, huge task, and my hat off to anyone who tries to do that and makes it work. But another option is chamber music is sorely neglected. And chamber music people can do for life. If we ever get back to, I can have 4 friends in my living room, I can't have 4 friends that need timpani and marimba and pianos and like, but I can get 4 friends in my living room and we can make up a piece, and I can record my own part and send it to the next person. I think one of the things we sometimes overlook is that multi-track recording is super hard. And we talk about ensemble skills, we talk about playing together, we talk about being responsive to other musicians. There are other ways to package it, and we can still be working together. We just need to be a little more imaginative in our packaging. So we're kind of creeping up on the end of our time together, though I'm perfectly happy to go all night, but we're kind of creeping up on the end of our time. So discussion leaders, did you have any final comments that you want to leave us with today?
All I would like to say is that, you know, we need to have our pedagogy and our philosophy guide whatever change we make. And I also think we need to put creating music at the center of everything we're doing, in whatever format we find ourselves in the fall.
Well, that's silly, Gina.
I know, it's stupid, whatever, but you know, I can dream, can't I?
Yes, you can. And we all can, and I hope that's what we do. I used to say that the only thing that moves slower than music education were the glaciers. But now I think the glaciers are actually moving faster than us, and that's unfortunate in lots of ways. But there's a lot of movement happening, I think, and it's still slow, but it's a great fight. And it's a worthy fight, and I hope we all keep at it, do our little bit each.
Yeah, I'm encouraged by the discussion, by the preoccupation, by so many people here thinking together about that. I follow Jody in a sense that there is a sense of urgency, and I think that the fact that we're all here together giving this some thought, and hopefully we'll see each other for a number of weeks, and I think that that's part of that process of how do we get to a moment of change is exactly that, engaging thoughtfully, and hopefully at each point of conversation, doing something differently. I think that, you know, we have, as educators, thought for so long and thought so hard about the idea of scope and sequence. And I think that this is, to a certain extent, is almost within our DNA, and it's almost atavic, it's almost part of what we do without thinking. I think that this is a moment in which change will come from more ad hoc kind of initiatives. And out of those initiatives, different kinds of ways of engaging with the possibility of what a teacher education music program ought to look like. Something that is more diverse, that looks differently in different places, that it's not 660 some programs that actually look very much the same. So, and I think that that's going to start here in the sense of ad hocness, in the sense of us actually resolving local problems, partnering in local kind of enterprises, coming together cross institutions, and thinking differently about what it is that I can do come September, that is 20, 30% different than what I've done before. If we have a commitment to something like this, if we have a commitment that I'm going to start thinking more about collaboration, I'm going to start thinking more about collective assessment, I'm going to start thinking more about ungrading, I'm going to start thinking more about chamber musicking, I'm going to start thinking more about project-based structure. I think that we might actually have a quite surprising and positive outcome that is field wide. I'm very trusting of that moment, because as I said a minute ago, I think that some of the pushback that we tend to respond to and limit our actions will not be there. It certainly will not be there in the same way. There might be new things that come along, but I think that there's a pretty strong possibility for us, and I think that many of us will take.
I would like to thank our discussion leaders, Gina Greer, Patrick Schmidt, and David Williams, for their comments tonight. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. I would like to invite you to join us next Monday on May 18th using this same Zoom link for session 2 of this conference, featuring Janice Smith of the Aaron Copland School of Music at Queens College City University of New York, and myself, Michelle Kashub from the University of Southern Maine, as we consider learning to teach online, a new kind of collaborative education. This concludes session 1 of our Music Teacher Education in the Age of COVID-19 conference. Thank you all. Be safe, be well, and hope to see you soon.